Hey everybody, I'm Will Garcia.
And I'm Josh Earl.
And we're the Hoops Guys. And in continuing our 2014-15 NBA team previews, today we're talking about the Philadelphia 76ers. How they do.
Yeah. Bad is the word.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, they finished 19-63, which surprisingly wasn't the worst record in the NBA last year. But
I think it's my dad's birth year.
But regardless, they were the worst team last year, and it was a good thing for them though, because their plan is to accumulate a lot of high lotto picks and try to build quickly that way. So they were, as bad as the season was, they did get some benefit out of it in that they wound up with the third pick, and they had the 10th pick from the Pelicans through the Nerlens Noel, Drew Holiday trade from last year. So they had two lotto picks and wound up following a trade, winding up with Joel Embiid at the third pick and Dario Saric at the 12th pick, hence the
Genius trade
mentioned earlier.
How Hinkie was able to turn that 10th pick into a 12th pick of their 17 first-rounder that they got back and a second-rounder from Orlando. Awesome trade. Hinkie is one of the best in the business at getting assets and getting draft picks.
Yeah.
Speaking of best in the business, there weren't too many things that the Sixers were the best in the business at, but one thing that they were good at was having a solid, analytically supported offensive system. You can really tell that Hinkie came up as Daryl Morey's kind of right-hand man out in Houston, and you can really see that when you watch this team play offense.
Yeah, they wound up taking a lot of high-value shots.
In terms of analytics, yeah.
Yes, in terms of analytics. They took high-value shots. So they were third in expected points per shot, which is a metric from Ian Levy at Nylon Calculus. Great site, great metrics there. And it basically just measures the value of your shot selection. So they did really well in terms of getting high-value shots in the restricted area around the rim. They shot the second fewest shots from mid-range, which is, analytically speaking, the worst shot place, in terms of value. And then they also finished 10th in the league in above-the-break three-point shot attempts. So they didn't necessarily do well offensively, but they did take valuable shots.
Yeah, and then some of the analytically supported stuff carried over into the defense. This is a team that tied for third in opponent turnover percentage, which a lot of that was due to their system, and they were first at eliminating shots in the paint.
Yeah. On a player perspective, they did have one player kind of be a player of note. Michael Carter-Williams, of course, won the Rookie of the Year award. And it's easy to see why he did. He was only the third player in NBA history at under the age of 22 to post averages of at least 16 points per game, 6 rebounds per game, and 6 assists per game. The other two being the Big O, Oscar Robertson, and Irvin Magic Johnson. So that right there prompted a lot of people to think, oh, this is awesome. On top of it, in a very, very weak draft class, Michael Carter-Williams wound up leading all rookies, once again, led all rookies in points per game, rebounds per game, assists per game, and steals per game. So it's easy to see why he was voted Rookie of the Year.
Yeah. I mean, and like you've been saying, it's easy to see why it happened, but I'm not, and I'm sure you're not either, so sold on him being in that sort of historically elite company. I mean, Magic won a championship that year, putting up those numbers, and the Big O was 30, 10, and basically 10 his rookie year. So I wouldn't exactly say those are a fair comparison. And then also, like you mentioned, weak draft class, so it's not really that hard to lead in everything when you're dominating everybody in terms of getting minutes and touches by that much.
Yep.
It was a really solid year in terms of box score stats, but I think it was a bit hollow.
Yep.
Speaking of hollow sounds like Hollis, and Hollis Thompson's contributions were nothing at all hollow. Kind of a weird way to get to that point, but either way, one thing that wasn't weird was that he shot 40% from 3 and played really solid defense. He was their only reliable 3-point shooter, other than Spencer Hawes, who left.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he was really important for this team, even though the 6 points per game and like 20 minutes per game wouldn't really suggest it. The spacing he provided there, and the fact that he was able to do so well on like spot-ups and playing solid, energetic defense. I mean, he's a rookie who tries on defense. What more can you want?
Yeah. One thing that has been pretty positive for them, it has little impact on the floor right now, but Sam Hinkie has done a really good job of giving this organization a lot of flexibility, both right now and going forward, both in terms of salary and roster flexibility. It'd be very easy for them to go a variety of ways right now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And speaking of going a variety of ways and having flexibility, this team has a truckload of draft picks, like a metric butt ton. Or a empirical butt ton.
However you want to
Either way, it's a bunch of draft picks, especially this year. They have Miami's first, unless Miami's in the lotto, which they won't be. I will literally eat a hat if they are. They have Golden State, New Orleans, and Orlando's second-rounders. They have a lot, in addition to their own picks, which are going to be pretty high, no offense. They have a lot of chances in this draft. They say the draft's a crapshoot. Well, they have as many chances as anybody to get a really good player.
Yeah.
But the problem with really good players is that this team didn't have that many. They didn't have the talent or the cohesion or the fit to do much of anything on offense or on defense.
Yeah. Offensively, they kind of failed at all 4 of Dean Oliver's 4 factors. They didn't convert their shots on offense. They were dead last in offensive rating. They were dead last in actual points per shot, which is another element of the XPPS stat I mentioned earlier from Ian Levy at Nylon Calculus. They were 29th in effective field goal percentage, which also makes sense because they were bottom 5 in field goal percentage from every area on the court, with the one exception of mid-range, where they were 7th worst. They also didn't get to the line or convert from the line very well. They were 25th in free throw per field goal attempt and 29th in free throw percentage. They also turned it over more than any other team, finishing dead last in turnover rate.
Yep.
And they didn't really gain extra possessions from the offensive boards, where they finished 22nd in the league.
Yeah, that was a bit of a struggle for them. And that struggle continued on the defensive end, where the Sixers only finished 26th in defensive rating and dead last on defensive actual points per shot. Additionally, this team gave up a bunch of good looks, finishing 28th in defensive XPPS, giving up the 5th most corner threes, which is one of the most efficient shots in basketball, the 9th most shots at the basket, in the restricted area, in the rim. Not in the rim, but most of them did go in the rim, which we'll talk about in a bit. They gave up the 9th fewest mid-range jumpers, which are the, analytically speaking, least effective shot. And these teams made their shots against them. The Sixers finished in the bottom 6 in field goal percentage from mid-range, from the corner, from above the break threes, and in shots near the rim.
Yeah, to be fair, a lot of this is systemic, and because of the personnel that they have. They run a very aggressive trapping style defense in order to generate live ball turnovers.
Except it doesn't really work very well.
Yeah, and because of that, it usually, when you gamble for steals, more times than not, you're not going to get the steal. You're going to cede prime court real estate for the opponent, and with that prime court real estate, those guys are going to convert. And it also doesn't help that your best rim protector is a guy like Henry Sims. No offense to Henry Sims, but yeah.
He's not a rim protector.
And between their offensive and defensive struggles, it's not really that surprising that they finished with the third worst win percentage in the franchise history. Mm-hmm. And this is the franchise that has the worst season in terms of record of any NBA team ever, with that 9-win season. But their record from this year is actually overstated a little bit. Yeah. Prior to the trade deadline, when they still had Evan Turner and Spencer Hawes, they were winning at a 41.7% clip. So they were 15-36. After getting rid of 2 of their top 4 scorers, after the trade deadline, they were winning at a 14.8% clip, where they finished only 4-27 after the trade deadline. This, along with not a particularly attractive brand of basketball, would help explain why they finished second to last in attendance last year, too.
Yeah, speaking of ugly brand of basketball, when Michael Carter-Williams shot a three-pointer, it was pretty ugly. He is the second worst in NBA history in terms of a player who took more than 200 shots from three, and in terms of field goal percentage on those three-pointers. He tied with Josh Smith this year.
Let that sink in. Everyone's talked about how bad a three-point shooter Josh Smith is, right? Mm-hmm. No one's mentioned Michael Carter-Williams. They tied for the second worst in history.
Yeah, and number one's Antoine Walker. Gotta give that guy a little shout out.
The Twan shimmy.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then on top of that, Michael Carter-Williams was kind of forced into a really high-usage primary scorer type role, which he was miscast in. But regardless, it wound up leading to a really inefficient season. Out of all 893 players in NBA history to have averaged over 30 minutes per game in a season and a usage rate over 25% in that same season, he was 25th worst in true shooting percentage at 48%. And he was 9th worst in turnover rate at 16.9%. So, historically speaking, yes, he won Rookie of the Year. Yes, from a box score perspective, he did a feat that was only matched by Magic Johnson and Oscar Robertson, 2 of the greatest of all time. But he also was one of the worst first options in NBA history. And that really, I don't think, should fall on his shoulders that much, because contextually speaking, the team had very little in terms of shot creation, especially after the trade deadline. And the rest of the players on the team, nobody really provided the skill set of being able to break down the defense. Kind of like, so Carter-Williams was kind of thrust into that role, which that's not what he's good at.
It's not his game. Yeah. No, it's kind of like I love Ricky Rubio, and I like Rajon Rondo too. But if you're making those guys play like Kobe, it's not their game. Precisely. And you're going to have a bad time.
Yes.
But a guy who isn't going to have a bad time, when he might be having a bit of a bad time now with his busted up foot, but once he recovers from that, Joel Embiid.
Yeah.
He was in the running to be the first pick in the draft. But then that navicular fracture in his foot happened, and teams were like, oh my god, it's a big dude with a foot problem.
Yes, rightfully so, though.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So that raised some questions about his long-term health, but he is a capable low-post scorer, especially out of that left block area, way down low, and he's big enough to get good position to get that. Can get blocks, can get steals. He averaged over 4.5 blocks and 1.5 steals per 40 minutes at Kansas. And he's a useful rim protector right now, which the Sixers desperately need. I mean, no offense to Henry Sims, but that guy couldn't block a spam account on Twitter. So, yeah. The one problem with Embiid was that he did get into foul trouble a lot. He fouled out of 14% of his games and he got 4 or more fouls in 54% of them. Holy cow.
That's pretty
bad.
So
it shouldn't be. That is really bad, especially in college where you only get 5.
Yeah.
So this is why he only played 23 minutes per game for the most part. He just couldn't stay on the court. But when he comes back, the Sixers are going to have a really useful talent who fits in very well if he can stay on the court, and that means both foul trouble and health.
Yep.
And they did bring in the guy who actually kind of discovered Joel Embiid, which is Luke Richard Mbah-a-Moute.
The Prince, yes.
The Prince, yeah. He's going to be really useful for them as a wing defender, but I'm going to talk a bit about how he found Embiid. Basically, he coached a 17-year-old Embiid at a camp in Cameroon, and then he's like, wow, this guy's actually really good at basketball for a 17-year-old kid. So then he invited him to a camp in Johannesburg, South Africa. And then, after he did really good there, Mbah-a-Moute called up Embiid's father and started a dialogue there and convince his dad to allow Embiid to play high school basketball in the United States. So there's a really cool relationship going on there, like sort of like a mentor-mentee sort of thing.
Yeah. And Moute is likely to fill that kind of role not just for Embiid next year, but for the bulk of this roster. It's a very young roster. In fact, Mbah-a-Moute is the only player on the roster. Jason Richardson's contract is listed, but let's be honest, he's not really there per se. So Moute is the only guy on the roster over 26. And he's the only player who's played in over 3 seasons in the NBA. Yeah. So he's going to be that veteran presence in the locker room and not only a mentor to Embiid, who he has a relationship with, but probably to a lot of these young players.
Absolutely. And he's a really good guy to do that job.
Oh, yeah.
He's a cool dude. Speaking of a guy who maybe, I'm not going to say he wasn't a cool dude, but he was a cold dude playing out in Minnesota last year.
And before that, Russia. So.
True.
Yeah.
Alexei Shved, who struggled mightily in 2 years in Minnesota. He had a career true shooting percentage of 47. We talked about Michael Carter-Williams being bad at 48.
Yeah.
This guy was at 47. So he can't really shoot, but the one thing that he can do well, he doesn't really do it well, but he's huge for a guard. He's like 6'6". So he can play either guard position. He's a capable enough facilitator to play someone. And because he's so long, you can kind of swap him in for Carter Williams and not have to really change your scheme that much, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Speaking of a guy who's going to change the scheme, Nerlens Noel is going to change their defensive scheme quite a bit, don't you think?
Yeah, he's definitely going to help them with the rebounding and the rim protection presence that they lacked last year. Nerlens is one of only 25 players in the last 5 years in the NCAA to have an over 10% offensive rebound rate, an over 20% defensive rebound rate, a block rate over 10%, and who played at least half the game, so at least 20 minutes a game. Yeah. And on top of that, he had a steal rate of 3.9, which you just don't really see a lot of bigs who can generate generate a fair amount of steals. At least not recently. I mean, there were guys like Hakeem who were really killer at that, and David Robinson. So we haven't really seen a big who's not only a rim protection presence, but also kind of a defensive disruptor in terms of generating steals, at least, in a little while.
Yeah, it's like a Ben Wallace kind of thing.
Yeah, and Nerlens, he's going to help them dissuade and contest shots at the rim, which obviously was an issue last year.
Yes.
And he's really going to be a great fit with their aggressive, trapping defensive strategy meant to generate turnovers. And he's already kind of proved pretty disruptive defensively in the preseason, where he's been averaging 2.5 blocks a game, 2.25 steals per game, on only 3.25 fouls per game in over 30 minutes a game. It's a small sample size, but considering this is what he did on the collegiate level, it's a nice way to reduce uncertainty in the sense that we can feel somewhat comfortable that this is likely to translate on the NBA level.
Absolutely. Speaking of a guy who I think is going to translate on the NBA level, I like Dario Saric. Do you like Dario Saric?
I like Dario Saric, but he's not going to translate on the NBA level for at least 2 years.
True.
He's a very promising point forward type. I wouldn't use direct player comparisons, but think of a guy sized like Hedo Turkoglu or Tony Kukoc who can handle the ball and pass. Mm-hmm. He's one of those type of guys. I'm not saying he's like those guys, but he's a similar size and handling facilitation combination. Yep. But his current contract overseas is locked in for 2 years. There's no NBA out clause in it. So
he's 2 years away from being, well, he's just 2 years away.
Yeah, he's 2 years away from actually being able to be a Sixer. Mm-hmm. But one guy who's a Sixer right now is KJ McDaniels. He was their 32nd pick, the 32nd pick in this last year's draft, their first second-round pick. Mm-hmm. And he's a guy who should also translate defensively on the NBA level and do some similar things to Nerlens, but from a wing perspective. Mm-hmm. He's 6'6", but he's got a 6'11 plus wingspan, which is, saying something.
It's huge.
And he uses it really well to contest shots and also generate steals, which is going to fit in very well with that defensive strategy geared towards forcing turnovers. And he's also going to help contest more shots, and also that wingspan and his mobility and his desire to defend, which is a big thing, is going to hopefully help close down a little bit more passing lanes and a little more driving lanes and make closeouts on shooters a little more contested. So it should help lower the opponent field goal percentages that the Sixers gave up last year.
Yeah, and the thing with him that kind of surprised me was in college, he blocked 1.6, 1.7, some huge number of shots
he blocked
per game.
A lot.
Yeah, and usually I was like, oh, this is college. When he gets to bigger and more athletic NBA dudes, it won't carry over. Nah, preseason, 2 blocks a game.
Yep, and 1 steal a game.
So that's crazy. I mean, a 6'11 wingspan, a 6'6" dude who wants to play defense.
Yeah.
And with a coach like Coach Brown.
Yep. Who
really values that. Oh, perfect pick.
Oh, yeah. Another guy talking about wingspan on a wing player, Jeremy Grant from Syracuse. He's 6'8 wing, but he's got a 7'2 plus wingspan. Unfortunately, this is outside of the perceived potential that he might bring down the line. Because he's so long and he's a wing and he's perceived to be athletic, people kind of think down the line he'll be good. But from a skill perspective, there's really nothing that he brings right now to the table.
No, they're hoping they can teach him how to play basketball.
Yeah, which usually that does not work for you. Speaking of something that didn't really... that isn't going to work out for them this season. They let go of Thad Young, who was, up till this offseason, the longest tenured Sixer.
Yeah, and arguably their best player.
Yeah.
He operated mostly as a face-up 4. I can't believe I'm saying this, but he was probably one of their best three-point threats.
Yeah.
But he was really their primary scoring option, and he's going to be missed.
Yep.
Another guy who I think is going to be missed, or at least compared to the other players on this roster, James Anderson, who started 62 games for this Philadelphia squad. One of this team's only consistent-ish three-point shooters. He shot about 33% from there, which compared to average is bad, but compared to this team is good. It's kind of...
Like you said, it's ish.
Yeah.
Like...
They waived him.
Yeah.
They waived a guy who started 62 games. That goes to show about how good this team is.
Yeah, they don't seem to care a whole lot about continuity, and that's somewhat reflected in their roster turnover, right, Will?
Yeah, they had the most roster turnover out of any team this offseason, which is why we're talking so long about them.
Yeah.
Because everybody's new. Only 45% of player minutes from last season are coming back, according to John Schumann up on Twitter. Thanks a bunch for that. But yeah, this team isn't really in, continuity is a huge deal.
No.
They're not really in that mindset right now.
And then with all these changes, obviously it's made an impact on their possession delta. Why don't you tell us what that was
possession delta,
and what
it's just the
is.
number of possessions, like shots and turnovers, that they lost over free agency versus what they brought in. This team lost about 12. But those are probably going to get filled up. Most of those probably came from Thad Young.
Yeah.
And most of them are going to get filled up by probably Nerlens Noel, KJ McDaniels, because I don't take rookies into account on this.
Yeah.
So that's not that big of a deal. And it's another thing that's not that big of a deal and pretty average is the rest differential, right, Josh?
Yeah, so rest differential, real quickly, is just the comparison of their 4 games in 5 days, 3 games in 4 days, and road back-to-backs compared to their opponents over the course of the season. So it's just seeing the difference there. And they were -4. So over the course of the season, they're going to be less rested than their opponents. But that said, it's not going to be a particularly big deal because this team is stacked with young players. And they're not afraid to bring guys up from the D League to play in a game where, you know, a guy like Nerlens or MCW after he comes back with a shoulder injury, they wouldn't be afraid to rest those guys in a 4-game and 5-night scenario and bring up like a D League guy. So the rest isn't going to be a major issue.
Absolutely. Speaking of things that were a major issue, this team was dead last in offensive rating and actual points per shot this last season, which is what is going to be our first out of 5 questions.
Yep.
So this Sixers team, like we just mentioned, was dead last in both of those areas. Lost 3 of their 4 biggest scorers. Is this going to be the worst offense that we've seen in a really long time?
I'll put it this way. They have a much better shot at contending for this than they do for a championship in the next 5 years.
Yep. That hurt, but you're right.
It's accurate.
I'm not even a Philly fan and that
It's going to be a really rough year offensively for them. You took away Evan Turner, Spencer Hawes, and Thaddeus Young, who were, outside of Michael Carter-Williams, those were your guys that generated points last year. All of them are gone.
Yep.
And Michael Carter-Williams, as we mentioned earlier, is not the most efficient shot creator.
That's not
his game. So, and Nerlens isn't really a scorer,
no,
and neither is guys like KJ McDaniels. And Embiid probably is a guy who could do that for them, but he's not going to play this year, most likely.
No.
So, offensively, they're going to be even more brutal to watch than they were last year.
Yep. Agreed entirely.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take the second question then. Can this team identify some long-term core players on this roster outside of Nerlens, MCW, and Embiid?
That's a pretty good question. I think KJ McDaniels has a pretty good shot.
Agreed.
Assuming he doesn't play out of his mind this year, or at least as well enough to get some other team to offer him something in the off season, and we'll explain why this is a problem in a little bit. So he's a guy who I think has the potential to be a core long-term piece for them, but I'm not sure he's necessarily going to be that for other reasons. Hollis Thompson is a guy who might be able to stick around.
Yeah, like a 3-and-D guy.
Same with Mute and maybe a guy like Henry Sims. I'd hesitate to call any of those 3 core guys, though, long term. So outside of...
They could be like a core in terms of like a culture thing.
Yeah,
but
I think
in terms
Mute,
of like a playing thing.
I think Mute is got the best shot of those 3 of being kind of a core guy, at least in terms of locker room presence and stuff. But really right now it's Nerlens, MCW, Joel Embiid, and hopefully in 2 years, Dario Saric. So it's kind of bare bones from a core standpoint right now because MCW is out right now with a shoulder injury and won't be back until I think the 13th of December. Nerlens, of course, didn't even play his rookie year because of injuries. And Embiid is likely not going to play this year because of injuries.
Exactly.
So the cupboard is a little barren right now in terms of we know for certain these guys have proven on the NBA level that they could be a strong piece of a core going forward.
Yeah.
One thing that's another major question for them, considering that their core is somewhat in question at the moment, is the way the core pieces, at least right now, the prospective core pieces are, none of them can really shoot.
No.
And nobody else on the roster, with the exception of Hollis Thompson, can shoot.
Nope.
So, when do you think they're actually going to address this problem?
I don't know. Maybe in this draft coming up, there might be some guys in the second round, or maybe even like the late first or mid first, because they might have that Miami pick.
Yeah.
Maybe they get a guy like Frank Kaminsky. My dude. I was on the Kaminsky train before it was cool.
It's true. He was.
Yeah. Before those tournament things, and he was trending on Twitter and stuff. But they might address it in like the second round. I'm surprised they didn't get any shooters in the second round in this year's draft, just because there were guys available who could have done that.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised they didn't go after like an Alec Brown.
Yeah, an Alec Brown, or maybe a Spencer Dinwiddie type.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they have ways they can address it, and that's one thing they can do right away to start winning more games, and maybe that's why they're not doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there are guys that you can find right now that were undrafted.
Andre Dawkins.
Yeah, Andre Dawkins is a guy who can really shoot it. His Duke teammate Seth Curry is also a guy you could bring in. I mean, they could address the shooting issue fairly easily, but I think right now it might be a systemic thing that they're trying to make sure that they're not that good offensively. The word is tanking. Normally, I'm opposed to saying tanking is a problem because I don't think overall it is.
This team's doing it.
If any team is actually tanking, it's the Sixers. Considering their tanking and the somewhat uncertainty of their core pieces going forward, and the aforementioned bad shooting amongst those core pieces, how are Nerlens Noel and Joel Embiid going to fit together? Are they going to play much together? Does it make sense playing them a lot together, considering nobody on the perimeter for this team can shoot?
Yeah, neither one of them are really phenomenal shooters either. Everyone talks about Embiid maybe be able to go up to mid-range. I didn't see it. And the shot charts agree with me. He can operate really well on that left block, but that's going to, with Nerlens being there, it's going to be kind of cramped. And in the 2.9 second style defense, it's going to be really cramped. Especially, I mean, you don't have to go 4 out.
No, not at all.
And they could do it. And everything I'm mentioning could, be mitigated. But the problem is a guy like Carter Williams needs to get into the paint. Because you don't want him, and his second worst shooting season of all time, chucking up jump shots. A guy like Mbah Mute, if you're putting him at the 3, because he's probably their best 3, they need to put him in the paint.
Yep.
Or near that area. A guy like Hollis Thompson can help out with that, but they're probably going to be starting Tony Roten, who also needs to get into the paint.
Or they'll start KJ McDaniels, who I like a lot and think he's going to be really good for them, but he also is another guy who's not really a shooter.
So it's going to be really cramped. I think you can put them together, but what we probably wind up seeing, especially because there is some redundancy in their skill sets, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'd rather have 2 rim protectors than 1 rim protector, and I'd definitely rather have 2 than 0.
Yeah.
I think that they stagger the minutes. Both of them wind up mostly playing the 5, and they might start next to each other, but the way the substitutions work, you can give both of these guys 30, 32 minutes a night.
Yeah, without
next year,
too much overlap, yeah.
And there won't be that much overlap.
Yeah.
And with the way this team is right now, maybe one of them even gets traded by next year.
It's possible.
It could. Yeah. So this could be a whole big thing out of nothing. It might actually be a thing, but I don't think it's that big of a deal.
Yeah, I think there are ways you could make it work. It's just going to be a little tighter making it work when nobody on the perimeter can space the floor, and you're talking 2.9 style defenses. But it could function. And Brett Brown is a smart coach.
He is a good
who should be
defensive
able
coach.
to make that work.
He can do it. Speaking of making it work, do you think the Sixers are trying to follow the Thunder's model for making it work, or the Celtics model for making it work? Are they trying to do some weirdo hybrid of both, or maybe their own thing? Like, what are they doing here?
In a lot of ways, it's a hybrid.
Okay.
I think...
and maybe explain the Thunder's model and the Celtics model.
Yeah. So the NBA is very much a copycat league.
Very much.
And the OKC Thunder, obviously... whether you want to call it tanking or rebuilding, they were able to luck into some, and don't discredit the power of luck in these scenarios, but they were able to luck into some high draft picks, which allowed them to get guys like Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and that core was then able to grow together over a couple of years and all of a sudden go from terrible team to, we're in the playoffs and we're kind of dangerous to
and we're in the finals because Miami.
We're in the finals. Yeah, so that's a model that I think a lot of teams are trying to follow. That's why there's a little more media narrative-driven discussion of tanking.
Yeah.
It's really... outside of the Sixers, let's be honest, they are.
They're tanking.
Outside of the Sixers, every other team isn't really tanking. They're rebuilding, which is a different thing.
Yep.
But the Thunder model, once again, requires a lot of luck. So it's a tough thing to kind of...
It relies on not taking Hasheem Thabeet.
Yeah, well, it relies
multiple
on somebody
times.
else taking Hasheem Thabeet so that you then... are left with your second choice, James Harden, which was the case for the Thunder. The flip side of that is kind of the Celtics model under Danny Ainge, where he was drafting a lot of young talent that had a pretty decent perception league-wise, including a really good, is still probably the best, outside of maybe a guy like Pau Gasol or Timmy when he's still... like really wanting to work his magic in the post. They had Al Jefferson, who's probably the best post scorer in the NBA right now. And then they were able to package him along with some of the other young talent that they had in order to take advantage of a Seattle team, hello Sam Presti, who were looking to get worse. They were looking to rebuild and get high draft picks, so they wanted to get rid of their all-star, who was Ray Allen. And then because they were able to acquire Ray Allen, they were able to get in on the discussion with Kevin Garnett, and they still had young assets available to flip for Kevin Garnett. And we know what happened next. They went on to win the championship the subsequent season. So those are kind of the two rebuilding models that I think they're going to take bits and pieces of. I think ultimately what the Sixers are trying to do, what Hinkie's thought process is the Thunder model is game plan A. Yeah. So we're going to get as many high draft picks as we can, and we're going to try to nail those picks. And we're trying to get high talent guys who can be superstars in our league. And then hopefully they'll be able to grow together and we'll be able to contend quicker than we might otherwise have.
Yep.
That said, I think they're also preparing themselves in the situation that maybe those guys don't work out as well as they'd like. And that this might be reflected in the sense that they weren't afraid to take Nerlens Noel or Joel Embiid despite injury problems that are problematic for bigs.
Yep.
So I think they're plan A is the Thunder model, but they're more than willing to go with plan B being the Celtics model and just acquiring a lot of young talent that is thought highly of around the NBA and being able to take advantage of, say, a James Harden extension scenario in OKC like Houston did, being able to offer the best deal if an all-star type player is available.
Yep. Absolutely. And like we saw this offseason, they have no problems trading a young dude, which we're going to get to later.
Yeah.
So around here, we have a little thing we like to do called 20, 50, 80. It's our way of giving our 20% prediction, a 50% prediction, and an 80% prediction. And that lets us say stuff we think is going to happen, crazy stuff that you can bank on almost, and pretty much anything in between. So Josh, what are your predictions for the 76ers team?
So I think it's 20% likely that the Sixers kind of rent out their cap space for a year or two to a team looking to unload an unsavory contract in exchange for a couple of second-round picks. Not likely going to get a first-round pick for anything right now in this market unless you're trading an active all-star at the moment. You're probably not going to get a first-round pick. But Hinkie loves his second-round picks, and he would be able to get some if he, in exchange for taking on a hefty contract that a team kind of wants to clear from their cap space. The only reason it's at 20% and not higher is because there's a lot of uncertainty in the league right now regarding how the NBA is going to kind of introduce the giant jump that's going to take place in the basketball-related income after the new TV deal comes out. Yeah. They're not going to want to introduce it flat out in 2016 because that could cause a massive jump in salary cap. So I think they're going to introduce some of it in this next offseason, but nobody really knows how that's going to play out right now. So even teams that have kind of less than attractive deals on their books at the moment probably aren't as eager to move them right now, especially if they have to give up assets to do it.
Right.
Considering that the cap might jump the next 2 years, and then that deal, while still going to be bad, is going to be less bad for you.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kids with your 80.
So my 50% likely...
You're 50, my bad.
Yeah. Jumping the gun, Will. So I think it's 50% likely that KJ McDaniels winds up getting himself a nice multi-year deal this next offseason. We mentioned earlier the fact that he could very well wind up being a core piece for this team going forward, but there's some uncertainty to it, and that's because of the contract he wound up signing this offseason. Most second-rounders will sign what amounts to a 4-year deal, where the first 2 years are guaranteed, fully guaranteed, at a little bit above minimum, and then the last 2 years are team options at minimum. This is the same sort of deal you saw Chandler Parsons on, for instance. But KJ did something unique and something, frankly, I think is really cool. He bet on himself. And what he did was he wound up taking the 1-year qualifying offer. And to put this in better perspective, the regular offer that the Sixers gave him was 2 years of guaranteed money.
Yep.
The 1-year qualifying offer is fully unguaranteed.
He can get cut.
He can get cut. And
lose his dinero.
Yeah. But I think he's, barring injury, which is the only reason why I think it's 50-50, I think he winds up netting himself a much nicer deal in this next offseason than that 4-year deal would have been for him.
Yep, he's not going to get waived. No. I would literally, be very surprised.
Yeah, unless it's an injury type thing.
Yep.
And then I think it's 80% likely, and I apologize to anybody that this might offend, but I think it's 80% likely that I won't want to watch any of their games this year, even if several of my friends were blowing up my phone saying, "Oh my God, Steph Curry's got 90 points on them. LeBron James is dropping a triple-double of 50 points, 20 rebounds, and 15 assists right now, and there's still the fourth quarter left, I'm still probably not turning in.
Would you watch it for a Linsanity game?
I probably wouldn't even do that.
Wow.
I'm. My friends know this. Will knows this. My friend James Carty knows this, and jokingly gives me crap about it. I'm very kind of stuck up about my basketball. Yeah. I don't like watching bad basketball.
Yeah, getting Josh through this preview to watch the film, it was really bad.
Yeah, I didn't enjoy watching all the film to prep for this. So yeah, it's unlikely that I would watch any of their games this next year.
It's like that Weird Al song, I can't watch this.
Yeah, pretty much. So for all you Sixers fans who will be watching this year, Godspeed.
Yes, you'll need it. Speaking of Godspeed, I don't really know what that has to do with Nerlens Noel, but I think it's 20% likely he wins Rookie of the Year.
I love how confident you are with your transitions.
My terrible segues.
You rock that segue just like JaVale McGee going down 16th Street Mall in Denver.
That's perfect.
You're welcome.
But I think he could win Rookie of the Year.
I think he could. Jabari's probably still the front runner, but Nerlens, I think you're right. He has a chance.
He's going to shoot way more than he probably should because there's no one on this
He's definitely going to shoot way more than he should.
He's going to get blocks. He's going to get steals. He's going to get boards. 14, 9, 2, and 1. That's a decent Rookie of the Year. I mean, it's kind of like what Amari did without the steals and the blocks when Amari won Rookie of the Year. So I don't think it's that crazy. Jabari probably wins. Mirotic could come in, maybe get like 25 minutes per game and go crazy. Wiggins could do it. I don't think he's going to, but he could. There are other players who have a better shot than Nerlens, but Nerlens is a serious candidate.
Yeah, another guy, Elfrid Payton might be able to have a
Harry Payton.
Yeah, Harry Payton might be able to have a Michael Carter Williams type year where he's going to put up box score numbers. He's going to have a really, really inefficient year and probably turn the ball over a lot. But he'll probably put up box score numbers and have the ball in his hands a lot to also be another option for Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, speaking of Rookie of the Year, I think 50% likely that former Rookie of the Year Michael Carter Williams gets traded by draft night next year.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that, once again, that they probably think highly enough of him that he might, that like if things played right, they would keep him long term. But I also think they're not far from viewing him in terms of trade value.
Yeah,
and we already heard rumors this past draft that they were talking with teams in the 7 to 9-ish range, gauging interest on MCW. So I think that if like a top 5 pick or a top 6 pick is available in this upcoming draft, I think MCW is probably gone. Oh, if that were the case, he would definitely be gone.
Yep.
Yeah.
Speaking of gone, this team's year, or the chance of having a better year than last year, I think the odds of that left.
It's dead and gone.
Players, it's dead and gone. Thank you, Jet. You're rescuing welcome. Me again. The old me is dead and gone, and the new me is going to be better at transitions.
As long as you keep the confidence.
Okay. Hopefully it's not irrational confidence.
Yeah, hopefully it's not irrational confidence. But yeah, I think you're spot on.
This is going to be a worse team.
Yeah, they did not get better.
And I have no irrational confidence in this team. They are not going to be good. They are not trying to be good. This is what they're aiming for. If you're a Philly fan, give it like 3 to 4 years. When we're doing our 2019 team previews and we're still saying this kind of stuff, then you have a reason to panic. But there is a plan in place here.
Yes.
And it's going... I'm not super high on it, but it might work. So, like, it might.
It has the chance that it'll work.
Yeah,
but there's also a pretty decent chance that it'll blow up in everyone's faces and 4 years from now, Hinkie's not there, Brett Brown's not there, and maybe one of these young guys is there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So do you think this team's going to be good?
That's a huge hell narp. No. Narp, narp, narp.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I feel for you, Philly fans. Like I said, I agree with Will. I'm not super sold on the plan per se, but for your guys' sakes, I hope that the patience pays off, and in a couple years we'll be doing previews talking about the Sixers. Will they continue their march up the playoff ranks?
Yep. So I think that wraps it up. Josh, any final words?
Godspeed, Sixers fans.
Yeah. So anyway, that concludes our 2014-15 NBA Philadelphia 76ers team preview. If you thought that this video is better than the Sixers are going to be next year, give it a thumbs up. If you think it's about as bad, give it a thumbs down. And maybe leave a comment saying why, or what you think this team's going to look like, or how you feel about guys like Embiid or Nerlens or Michael Carter-Williams, etc., etc. There is a subscribe button down below. And if you hit that button, you're going to be notified of all of our future team previews. If you like this, you can also go back and watch some of our other team previews. And I think that's a wrap. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I think we're out.
Take care, everyone.
All right, goodbye, everybody.